Hey, what's up, guys? Petzergling joined with Daz, bringing you the second game of the Group C of the Lost Saga round of 32 MSL. This is Fantasy versus Tempest, and just kind of last game, we saw both. I wouldn't really call them super old schoolers, but definitely seasoned veterans. Now we have Fantasy versus Tempest, both up-and-coming players who I think have played some excellent games in the past, but have also played some pretty shitty games. I mean, Fantasy made it so far in the OSL last season, and then I mean, he really hasn't done anything in any other league, although for a new player, his statistics are definitely good. I mean, he's over 50%, I believe, in all of his matchups. His TVP is actually his best matchup, although really isn't that high. I think it's probably 55%, so it's not that high, although he's been doing pretty well. Tempest's been playing mostly versus Terrans, as we see, so in the MSL, so I guess he'll have a little bit more practice on that as Fantasy. And Tempest, you know, I'm not a Protoss player, but I would probably say the most memorable thing about him is that the way he took out Jaedong in the GrpC. I think it was the round of 64, the GrpC Avertech Classic 2, just with this really kind of technical timing rush build that a lot of people thought would be one of the next real huge Protoss builds, but you know, that build and Tempest never really happened, so I guess Tempest is going to have another shot, see if he can advance it in, and Fantasy really wants to make a name for himself as, you know, not just kind of a one-shot hero, but winner in both leagues.
Yeah, Fantasy definitely probably has a lot to prove right now. I mean, getting second in the OSL, you have to feel like, you know, you need to prove to people that it wasn't a fluke. I mean, I think the pressure is much more on Fantasy than it is on Tempest right now. Tempest, still a really young, new player, up and coming, and even though Fantasy's pretty new, he's had some success, and he probably feels he has to live up to that, especially kind of being a protege of Uv right now. Anyway, we're going to sync this right now, so 2, 1, 0. Tempest, I just want to make a note that Tempest, although he's a pretty decent player, good all around, and he did manage to take out Jaedong in the GrpC MSL. He actually got, in the last MSL, I believe, he lost to Firebad Hero, and I believe he actually got 2-0'd by Firebad Hero, who's known for having pretty awful TVP. So, you know, I think that just shows that Tempest still has a long way to go, especially in his consistency. Although he does show some flashes of brilliance, like those games where he beat Jaedong. Either way, I'm looking forward to this game. I think it's going to be a good game. I like Fantasy. Fantasy's a pretty creative Terran. He did manage to do some cute builds, especially the TVZ mech build that he came. Well, a lot of people are saying that Uv came up with that build, but still props to him for executing it as well as he did. So far, we're not seeing any cheese opening for Tempest, even though Destination, really popular map to proxy on. He's building his 8 pylon standard. He's gonna probably scout after a gateway. Fantasy just building his depot, normal placement, building it right there, right below the command center. It actually, for those people who don't know why they do that, the SCV will come out right when you have 100 minerals. So that's like the economically best place to put your supply depot. Just for all you non-Terran players out there. Fantasy actually scouting pretty early. Looks like he's checking for a proxy. So he's pretty wary. He doesn't want to get caught in any stupid shit. Which, I don't know. I don't know if, are you better off checking for proxies with an SCV, or are you better off playing with a really kind of safe, early marine kind of build? Like, what's the best way to kind of deflect proxies on this map? Or even, would you be better off just trying to block?
Well, yeah, you know, it's a really kind of interesting build that Fantasy opened up with, and I'm kind of glad that you pointed that out, because, I mean, Fantasy went with, you know, a totally random supply depot. You know, it was an economic supply depot, but on a, you know, really difficult early game TVP map. I mean, that first supply depot was really valuable, and it looks like he's deciding not to wall in, but then he made a forward barracks, and he's kind of checking, so it's really, I guess I would, you know, classify this as a more very all-around safe opening. I mean, it's a very economic opening, but at the same time, I mean, he checked for proxies. I think if he would have scouted a proxy at this point, and that is a huge, huge favorite for Fantasy there. So it looks like Fantasy a big favorite to win this game, although I don't think his TVP is really that much better than Tempest. You know, I guess I just don't really like Fantasy that much. It's probably not one of my, I don't know, like everyone was, you know, oh, super mech build, Fantasy awesome, but it's like, that's been done, and I really wasn't impressed. I mean, I'm a huge, like, TVZ standard player, and I don't like all the mech stuff, especially when Zergs complain about mech. It's just like, well, like Fantasy, I guess, is kind of the root of all this stupid mech stuff that I hear about. And Fantasy taking his gas, pretty standard, then pulling 2 off after the factory. So, you know, real standard play is probably going to go into a 1 factory expand. Oh, wow. Tempest actually walled in Fantasy's SCV with a pylon. That was amazing. I cannot believe he just did that. I don't think I've ever seen that before in a professional game. I've never seen that before.
Oh, man. You gotta give it to this kid. I mean, he really does some pretty crazy shit. I don't know if that was on purpose or if they just got lucky there. I mean, holy shit. What a play. That's pretty big now because Fantasy now has to worry about what Tempest is doing. I mean, Tempest has the option of dropping down a Citadel right now, going for a 1-base Reaver, a 3-gate. I mean, he could pretty much do anything, and Fantasy has to be ready for anything. I mean, if Fantasy decides to, let's say, siege expand, he's going to have to get an academy. Or sorry, not an academy, he's going to have to go for turrets really quickly. So we're going to see what he's going to do. It looks like he's sending out this SCV. He's probably going to build an engineering bay or something with his SCV and then just kind of float it into Fantasy's base so we can tell what he's doing. It looks like, or sorry, float it into Tempest's base so we can see what he's doing. Tempest going for a pretty standard opening though. It doesn't look like he's going to take advantage of that. Unless he plans to Reaver drop with that robotics bay, but I would be very surprised if he does that. Looks like he's just going to go for a 1-gate. Robo and Observer is probably going to expand. Fantasy also doing the safe kind of economical play, just building a command center up on its cliff, and he's just going to float that over and do a 1-base siege expand. I really don't think that Fantasy's going to FD. I hope he doesn't choose to FD. It would probably be a pretty bad idea in these circumstances, and on this map as well.
Yeah, and you know, just like you said, that's really a big thing. And even though if you don't notice it, I mean, if it's one thing if you take the SCV scout out with the Dragoon as it's walking around, and it looks like, no, the SCV scout actually gets away. But the initial SCV scout, if you take that out that early, I mean, he really has to prepare for anything. And you see Fantasy, you know, not willing to take any risks, just playing very safe, you know, taking away his, more of his economy. I mean, he's building that command center in his base. And it looks like Tempest is actually playing extremely safe, too. And I guess that's kind of the advantage that Tempest is playing off here. It looks like he's really, you know, he denied the scout early and he got that advantage. And he's just going to use that to play the long-term game, play the economic game. And, you know, it's really going to open up to a really even game here. And Fantasy putting down this armory, so I have to imagine that Fantasy's going to go for, you know, unless he does some kind of crazy timing push. Normally the early armory signifies an early +2/+1 push, not an early +1 push. And it looks like Tempest once again sending that probe out, looking to see if that army was actually going to unveil a lot more stuff, but indeed it's just a few Marines and a few tanks. But really safe opening. You see 5 Marines, I think, at least 4 for Fantasy. So I mean, that's definitely a really safe build. And you see all 3 Dragoons positioned in Tempest's main. And I have to imagine that's in fear of a drop. That's really the only explanation I can think for keeping those Dragoons there. And now moving him out. Fantasy landing his command center, which is, I believe, just slightly ahead of Tempest, which I guess, you know, in theory would put Fantasy in the lead so far in this game.
Yeah, but it's really a minor advantage. I mean, it really basically means nothing. It's almost completely negated by the fact that Tempest has early observers. I mean, the faster you get observers out in PvT, the better off. Especially if you, I mean, a lot of time if you go, if you get observers really late and the Terran gets turrets in his main, especially if you lose your first observer and you can't tell what the Terran is doing, it's really bad for your game because you can't tell whether or not you can take the third early. But if he flies this observer in right now, he can tell right away that Fantasy is not going to be going for any kind of super early push, and he can definitely take his third safely. It looks like he decided to take his third before he even flew the observer in there anyway, but I mean, getting the observer in there is going to be big just because he's going to know, like, he's going to be able to tell exactly when Fantasy's push is going to come out, and that way he can you know, adjust his tech and his gateways accordingly. So a lot of people don't realize that, but your observers have a lot to do with what kind of economy you're going to have coming into the mid game, just because they really allow you to decide how many probes you're going to build, when you're going to stop building probes, when you're going to start building your gateways, etc., etc., etc. It looks like Tempest is going to go for the Reaver drop. This Reaver drop is probably not going to do a lot of damage, considering Fantasy already has Goliaths. The most important thing, of course, is just that he doesn't lose the Reaver. As long as you don't lose the Reaver, you know, you're okay building one. You don't really lose much from not doing damage. You just get behind in the game if you'd actually lose the Reaver. As you may know, taking out the Reaver for a Protoss is just really